Well, welcome everybody to week 4 of our January 2011 online program for the alumni of the Sunshine Coast Health Center here in Powell River, BC. And the last of our series on the spiritual bypass. And just to bring everyone up to speed, the spiritual bypass is a term created by psychiatrist Charles Whitfield to describe the process where people who are unhappy, early in recovery or in active addiction, suffering, feeling this void, feeling this emptiness, and then rather than work through all their anger, depression, guilt, all that kind of stuff, fears, they simply jump over it and land in this serene and peaceful world of spirituality. So they're bypassing the actual work involved. And last week, as we mentioned, a lot of psychologists now consider this to be a counterfeit transcendence. It's not really the real thing because, in fact, maybe spirituality is working through all of that stuff. Just like I'm sure we've talked in the online program before about one of my favorite poems, Dante's The Divine Comedy, in which beginning of the book he talks about, well, somehow I got off track in my life, and when he was in middle age, and then his first act is, well, I want to get to heaven, so I'm going to go up. Tries to get up the hill, but these monsters force him to go down the hill because, according to Dante, the only way to heaven is to first go through hell, right? But the spiritual bypass is, no, just go right into heaven. Forget all the nasty bit. Anyway, just to wrap things up on our last online program on spiritual bypass, and talk a bit about Ernie Kurtz. Now, I've talked to you about this before in the online program. He wrote this really great book called The Spirituality of Imperfection. And Dr. Kurtz actually sent me a copy, and he signs it, says, Geoff, be imperfect. And his big point is, and this, he says he figured this out from Alcoholics Anonymous. He's a big fan, as am I, of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he says, one of the geniuses of Alcoholics Anonymous is that it resurrected a kind of spirituality that used to be popular thousands of years ago. And this kind of spirituality, you did not live up to some kind of model, some kind of standard. In this spirituality, you actually celebrated the fact that you were imperfect. And it got to, it's like if someone is trying to climb up into heaven, if you want to help him out, grab him by the legs and pull him back down, because he's never going to find spirituality or meaning or anything way up there in the clouds. He's going to find it down in the dirt, in the everyday world, right? And one of the things about the spirituality of imperfection is to celebrate imperfection, because we're all human. And so rather than beat ourselves up about this, we're going to recognize our imperfection, no question about that. In the 12-step program, this is step 10, right? But we're not going to allow it to overwhelm us and to make us feel bad that we didn't live up to some standard. But for a lot of people, again, this concept of finding spirituality in the everyday world, and that maybe when we work through these very uncomfortable times in our life and these feelings that we get, and again these feelings of guilt or anger, fear, to be able to face these directly, maybe this is where a lot of the spirituality comes from, right? Because it teaches us things like humility. I mean, it's pretty hard to feel arrogant and all that kind of stuff if you actually accept that maybe you're not perfect. Right? And it allows you to form tolerance of other people, right? Because if I'm imperfect, probably other people are imperfect too. And that's okay. If it's okay for me to be imperfect, maybe it's okay for them to be imperfect. Things like tolerance, forgiveness, right? To accept the imperfection of other people. So there's lots of good spiritual things about being imperfect and accepting that I'm imperfect. Right? At any rate, I've taken Dr. Kurtz's recommendation to heart, so I'm definitely imperfect, but that's okay. Okay? So that's, again, now if you want to bypass all that stuff, you can just go through the spiritual bypass, and that all of a sudden you've landed in this world of serenity and peace where you really don't have to have a good long look at yourself and what you're afraid of. You can just forget all that and just sort of float around the universe in this very spiritual way, right? But just to encourage you again to maybe to work through this stuff, to face your fears, to face things that are making you uncomfortable, right? If when you're tired or you wake up in the morning, those memories of things that make you cringe, if they're still making you cringe, yeah, maybe you haven't faced them yet, because they aren't going to go away that easily, and they could come up in any number of ways, maybe in headaches, maybe in physical problems, maybe going offside in some behaviors, but they are going to be there, and they are going to have this great effect on you and be a barrier to your happiness. Okay. At any rate, as I mentioned, the psychologists are beginning to write a little bit more about this spiritual bypass, so something to be aware of in your recovery. At any rate, that's it for the January online program, and we'll see you back in February with another one.